The trouble started on a Monday morning because of course it did. I was sipping burnt coffee on my front porch, watching the sun crack through the clouds over my diesel F350 when I saw her marching down the sidewalk like she owned it. Candace Drell, HOA president. 60-something, bleached blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a voice like a car alarm. She always walked like she was late to fire someone. "Oliver Greaves," she shouted, clipboard already in hand. "That truck is a violation." I set my mug down. "Good morning to you too, Candace. It's oversized, it's commercial-looking, and it's parked on a community road. You've been warned twice. If it's not gone by tomorrow, we're towing it." I raised an eyebrow. "You're towing a truck I've owned since before this HOA even existed," she actually laughed. "And I'm sure you'll miss it, but rules are rules." I leaned on the porch railing. "Pretty sure the CCRs don't ban personal trucks. There's no signage, no weight limit. No designated commercial vehicle clause." She flipped a page on her clipboard. "Well, we had a board meeting last week and revised the vehicle guidelines." "Oh, you had a meeting without notifying any of us." It was an emergency session. "The board has the authority to act swiftly in the neighborhood's best interest, and your truck is an eyesore." I felt the heat rising in my neck. My truck wasn't some rusted-out junker. It was clean, registered, and legally parked right in front of my house. But Candace and her little HOA squad had been escalating lately: new fines, stricter rules, and a lot of threats that didn't line up with any legal documents. I looked her dead in the eye. "You touch my truck and you'll regret it." She smiled and tapped her clipboard. "I already filed the tow request. Say goodbye, Mr. Greaves." She strutted off like she just won a war, but I wasn't about to let some clipboard tyrant push me around. That night I started digging. County records, zoning maps, ownership deeds. I wasn't just going to fight her, I was going to bury her under paperwork, and that's when I found it. The road in front of my house, the one she claimed was community property, wasn't actually owned by the HOA. It was a private road, a leftover from a development oversight 10 years ago. Still under ownership of the original developer, who'd gone bankrupt and left the parcel in limbo. I tracked down the holding company that inherited the assets. After a couple phone calls and a wire transfer that cost me less than a used Honda, the road was mine. I bought the road. Candace had no idea that while she was planning to tow my truck, I had just become her landlord. By Wednesday morning, I had the deed in my hand, and a grin I couldn't suppress if I tried. I'd filed everything properly with the county clerk's office, and the parcel ID now listed me as the legal owner of the road running past my house and 5 others, including Candace's. I wasn't looking to start a war, just to end one. But then came the bright orange sticker slapped to my windshield. "Unauthorized vehicle," it read, "subject to immediate removal." The tow company's number was scrawled at the bottom in thick black marker. I peeled it off slowly, then walked to the cul-de-sac. Sure enough, a dark blue tow truck was idling nearby, the driver lounging behind the wheel scrolling through his phone. I approached, tapping the window with 2 knuckles. "You planning on hooking that truck today?" I asked. He glanced at his clipboard. "Ford F350. Plate ends in 091. That yours?" "It is." "Then yeah, I'm supposed to tow it." I pulled out a folded document from my back pocket and held it up. "Not today, you're not. This road's privately owned. That truck is on private property. I suggest you contact whoever sent you and tell them to double-check the parcel records." He frowned, took the paper, scanned it, and let out a low whistle. "You're kidding." "Nope." He sighed, reached for his radio, and started muttering something about a jurisdiction issue. I turned and headed back inside, not waiting around for the fallout. I had bigger plans. By noon, I drafted a new set of guidelines for the use of my road. I wasn't petty, well, maybe just a little, but I kept it clean. No unauthorized parking, no overnight guests without approval, and a monthly maintenance fee charged to any household with direct access. 5 homes in total, including Candace's. I hand-delivered the notices that afternoon. For Candace, I taped hers to her door legally. I had the right, since her walkway crossed my land. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. The next day, I received a certified letter from the HOA's legal representative. It was a cease and desist, citing interference with community governance and threatening litigation for malicious disruption of operations. I read it over twice, then sent my own response, this time from my attorney, a friend from college who owed me a favor. His letter was short and surgically precise, including the parcel documentation, the purchase agreement, and a highlighted section from the HOA's own charter stating they had no jurisdiction over privately held roadways. The silence from Candace's camp lasted 2 days. Then came the meeting. I arrived early, took a seat near the back of the community clubhouse, and waited. The room filled slowly, mostly retirees, a few young couples, and the usual bored spouses dragged along. When Candace finally entered, she looked rattled, not panicked, but off her usual axis. She stepped up to the podium and adjusted the mic. "Good evening, everyone. I'd like to begin with some updates regarding recent events involving one of our homeowners and the alleged purchase of community infrastructure." I raised my hand. "No need for alleged, I have the deed right here." She ignored me and pressed on. "We've been advised that this purchase may not be enforceable under state law, and we are preparing a legal response." I stood up. "That's a lie, and you know it." Murmurs spread through the room. I lifted the packet I'd brought. "This is a certified copy of the parcel transfer. The road in front of my house and yours, by the way, was never owned by the HOA. It was overlooked during the original filing. I bought it, legally." Candace's jaw tightened. "Regardless, you cannot charge residents fees without approval from." "Actually," I cut in, "I can, and I have. But let's talk about something else." I turned to the crowd. "Did you all know that Candace authorized a tow on a vehicle parked on land the HOA doesn't own? That's criminal trespass. And the tow company was almost complicit in vehicle theft." Gasps scattered through the room. Someone in the back called out, "Is that true?" I nodded. "I have the tow slip and a time-stamped photo of the truck waiting to hook my vehicle. I stopped it in time." "But if they'd succeeded, I'd be filing charges." Candace grabbed the mic. "This is not the place for accusations. This is exactly the place," I said. "I've filed a grievance with the county and sent documentation to the state HOA Oversight Board. I've also submitted a formal complaint to the district attorney's office regarding attempted unlawful seizure of private property." The room went dead quiet. Candace faltered. "You're blowing this out of proportion." One of the board members, a balding guy named Phil, leaned forward. "Candace, did you authorize the tow?" She hesitated. The board approved the enforcement." Phil frowned. "There was no vote. You sent that order on your own." It unraveled quickly after that. Homeowners started asking questions. A woman from Lot 16 pulled out her phone and began filming. Someone else demanded access to the meeting minutes from the past 6 months. The treasurer stood up and asked why they'd never seen the updated budget Candace claimed existed. I stepped back and watched it all unfold. The fire I'd lit didn't need tending anymore. The next morning, I received an envelope slid under my door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, effective immediately. "The HOA is rescinding any enforcement action regarding vehicle parking. No further contact will be made without legal review." It was unsigned. But the handwriting was unmistakably Candace's. I figured that would have been the end of it. But then I got a call from an older gentleman in the neighborhood, Hank, a retired police officer who lived 2 doors down. He invited me over for coffee. When I arrived, he handed me a folder. "You might want to see this," he said. Inside were copies of emails, dozens of them. All from Candace's HOA email account. Most were sent to the rest of the board, but some were addressed to vendors, contractors, even a landscaping crew. And they all had one thing in common: inflated invoices, altered quotes, and references to redirected expenses. Hank leaned back. "I used to work fraud cases. This smells like embezzlement." I looked through the papers again, this time slower. "Where'd you get these?" She left her email open on the clubhouse computer last week. I printed what I could. I stared at the pile. If this was real and it looked real, then Candace hadn't just tried to overstep her authority. She'd been funneling money for months, maybe longer. "We need to bring this to the sheriff," I said. "I already did," Hank replied. "They're opening an investigation, but it helps to have more voices, more pressure." I nodded. "You'll have mine." The next day, I posted a notice to every mailbox in the subdivision, short, direct, bullet-pointed. It listed the facts. The road was privately owned and legally purchased. The HOA had attempted to seize property unlawfully. Financial misconduct by board leadership was under investigation, and at the bottom, community meetings scheduled for Saturday. Location: my driveway. By the weekend, nearly everyone showed up. Some brought lawn chairs, others brought questions. A few brought casseroles. We didn't just talk about Candace. We talked about what our neighborhood could be with fair rules, transparency, and actual accountability. By the end of that meeting, we had signatures from over 80% of residents, enough to force a recall election. Candace never showed. But a moving van did. 4 days later. She was gone by Friday, and me? I built a small mailbox at the edge of the road, not for letters, for payments. 5 households, modest maintenance fees. I used it to repave the potholes and install new lights. Funny thing, once people realized the money was actually going towards something useful, they didn't mind paying. Justice wasn't loud. It was steady, unshakable, and parked right in front of my house. By the second week after Candace disappeared, the neighborhood felt noticeably different. The usual tension that had hung in the air like humidity was gone. People waved more. They lingered by their mailboxes. Kids actually played in the cul-de-sac again, but I knew the real cleanup wasn't over. The sheriff's office had been quiet since Hank turned over the emails. I figured they were working the case, maybe digging through bank statements or subpoenaing records. But I didn't expect what happened next. It was a Tuesday. Around mid-morning, a pair of unmarked sedans rolled through the front entrance. They weren't subtle about where they were headed. They parked directly in front of the HOA's old community office at the clubhouse. 2 plainclothes investigators stepped out, one carrying a thick folder, the other with a handheld scanner. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Phil, the former board member who'd turned on Candace during the meeting, walked over to me as I stood on my porch. He looked pale and uncomfortable, like a man who just remembered something he'd rather forget. "I didn't know she was funneling anything," he said without prompting. "Didn't say you did. They just asked me to sign off on budgets. She said the vendor stuff was routine." I didn't question it. I looked at him. "But you saw the discrepancies?" "I saw numbers," he admitted, "but I didn't pay attention. She always presented it like it was handled." The investigators entered the clubhouse and a third car pulled up minutes later. This one was marked. A deputy stepped out and started taping off the front steps with bright yellow squares of caution tape. That got everyone's attention. By noon, half the neighborhood had gathered at the edge of the community lawn. No one said much. We just watched as boxes were carried out one by one. Hard drives, filing cabinets, binders. A laptop sealed in a clear evidence bag. A few people took photos on their phones, but most just stood still, absorbing it. Eventually, the senior investigator turned to the deputy and asked something I couldn't hear. The deputy nodded and started walking toward me. "You're Oliver Greaves?" he asked. I nodded. "We'd like a word." I followed him a few steps away from the crowd. "You're the current owner of parcel 048, correct?" "That's right." He flipped open a notepad. "We've reviewed the deed. It checks out. You're not under any investigation, but we'd like your input on financial activity linked to the HOA's discretionary spending over the past year." I gestured toward the clubhouse. "You've got more records in there than I've ever seen. You'd be surprised what's missing," he said. "We believe Candace may have destroyed or altered digital logs. She used a home printer for most documents," I offered. "I remember seeing her walk out of meetings with paper that looked freshly printed, edges curled from the heat." He nodded slowly, scribbling. "That helps." Any idea where she might have stored backups? I hesitated. She mentioned once that she kept important things at her sister's place, never said where. The deputy raised a brow. You think her sister lives nearby? I'd bet on it. He thanked me and walked back toward the others. I stood there, watching them haul out the remaining boxes, the last traces of Candace's little empire. The next day, Phil knocked on my door. He looked like he hadn't slept. Under one arm, he carried a cardboard box with no label. This was in the storage closet behind the clubhouse water heater, he said. I don't think anyone remembered it was there. He set it down on my porch and opened the lid. Inside were receipts, handwritten meeting notes, and a small black USB drive. I picked it up carefully. You look nervous, I said. I am, he admitted. Because I signed off on at least 5 of those invoices in there, I want to make it right. I called the sheriff's office. They sent someone within the hour. That USB turned out to be the missing link. It contained a spreadsheet detailed, time-stamped, and exhaustive. Every inflated invoice, every payment to shell companies, and a list of names, including Candace's, under a column labeled Disbursement Split. According to the detective I later spoke to, Candace had created multiple LLCs that sounded like landscaping and maintenance services. She routed inflated payments through them, then funneled the proceeds back to herself and, from the looks of it, one other person, not Phil, someone named Darcy Toland. Treasurer, Darcy hadn't been seen since the recall meeting. She'd gone radio silent, skipped the last 2 board sessions, and ignored emails. But now her name was tied to at least 7 transfers totaling over $80,000. Within 48 hours, she was in custody. The news spread like wildfire. More neighbors came forward. One uncovered a check written directly to a non-existent vendor. Another found an email chain where Candace instructed the board to approve first, review later on a set of contracts. The HOA's reputation, already in tatters, was now legally radioactive. The county filed charges against both Candace and Darcy: fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, falsification of records. The DA's office called it one of the most brazen cases of community association abuse they'd ever seen, but the fallout wasn't just legal, it was personal. At the next informal gathering, this time held on the lawn near my driveway, people weren't just angry. They were embarrassed. Many had trusted Candace for years. Some had backed her against their better judgment because they didn't want the hassle of confrontation. And now they were dealing with the consequences. I stood up to speak when the group quieted. We can't undo what happened, I said, but we can make sure it never happens again. I laid out a proposal, nothing complicated. A new neighborhood council made up of rotating volunteers. No single president, no unchecked authority. Every expense over a certain amount would require a full neighborhood vote, all records would be public, and most importantly, no involvement in properties the HOA didn't legally own. There was no applause, just nods, slow, thoughtful nods. Afterward, a woman named Carla approached me. She was a nurse who lived 2 streets over, someone I'd spoken to maybe twice. You ever think about running for city council? She asked. I laughed. Not unless they let me do it from my porch, she smiled. Well, we'd back you. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no, either. Later that night, I sat on my front steps, watching the streetlights glow across the pavement I now owned. The road was quiet, clean, and finally free. My truck sat in its usual spot, untouched, as it should be. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next problem. I felt like I'd already solved it. The first real rain of the season came down in sheets that Sunday, blurring the streetlights and rattling the gutters. I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing an email from the county clerk's office when the knock came hard and fast, like someone wasn't sure if they were angry or desperate. I opened the door to find the deputy who'd spoken to me outside the clubhouse weeks earlier. His expression was tight with purpose this time. Mr. Greaves, he said, brushing water off his collar, you're going to want to come with me. He didn't elaborate until we were halfway to the station, windshield wipers thudding like a heartbeat. "We got a search warrant for Candace's old residence," he said. "Her son let us in. Apparently she left town without saying much, claimed she'd be back in a few weeks, but there was a locked filing cabinet in the garage. We opened it this morning." He glanced at me. There were more USB drives. And a ledger, handwritten, with initials linking to over a dozen transactions, not just HOA funds, personal checks from residents' cash payments made off the books supposedly to expedite approvals. I clenched my jaw. Bribes. Looks that way. We've already confirmed 3 separate payments for permits that were never officially filed. But here's the bigger issue. Some of that money crossed county lines, which makes it federal. I stared at him. "You're telling me this might go beyond our HOA?" He nodded. "We've looped in the FBI. Financial Crimes Unit. They're building a case now, but they'll need your help." I didn't hesitate. The next morning, I sat across from 2 federal agents in a plain room with beige walls and a humming ceiling vent. They laid out the scope of what Candace and her treasurer had pulled off. It wasn't just embezzlement, it was wire fraud, misuse of federal grant money intended for community development, and falsified insurance claims tied to storm damage that never happened. "She filed reimbursement claims with FEMA," one agent said, flipping a document toward me, "for repairs that were never done. Used the HOA's name, then diverted the funds to a contractor she created on paper." I stared at the letterhead. It was all so carefully constructed, but it was built on lies and now it was crumbling. The agents asked if I'd be willing to testify when the time came. I gave them a single nod. Back in the neighborhood, the fallout kept spreading. Residents who had once held their tongues now came forward with stories. A young couple admitted they were denied a backyard remodel unless they paid a processing fee directly to Candace. A veteran down the street revealed he'd been fined repeatedly for flagpole violations until he stopped asking questions. I started compiling everything: testimonies, receipts, emails, scanned documents. I built a secure digital archive and shared access with the investigators. They called it the cleanest evidence trail they'd seen in years. And then, something unexpected happened. A woman named Sherry moved into Candace's old house. She was quiet, mid-40s, and didn't say much when we first met. But a week after she moved in, she stopped me as I was coming back from the mailbox. "Are you the guy who bought the road?" she asked. "Depends who's asking." She held out a manila envelope. "I'm Candace's niece. She gave me power of attorney before she left, said if anything happened, I should give this to you." I took the envelope and opened it right there on the sidewalk. Inside was a typed confession, unsigned, but unmistakably Candace's voice. It detailed how she manipulated board members, created fake vendor accounts, and funneled money into shell companies. She claimed she did it to protect the community from mismanagement, but the numbers told a different story. "She told me to burn it," Sherry said, "but I read it and I couldn't. My mom donated to that HOA fund. She thought she was paying for new park benches." I thanked her and handed the letter to the investigators that same afternoon. With the confession, the evidence trail was airtight. The agents issued a federal arrest warrant. Candace was picked up at a bus station outside Flagstaff, trying to board a shuttle with a fake ID and a suitcase full of prepaid debit cards. The news broke 2 days later. Local headlines exploded with the story. HOA president charged in multi-state fraud scheme. I didn't read the articles. I didn't need to. I lived it. What mattered was what came next. The federal case moved fast. Candace pled out within 6 weeks in exchange for a reduced sentence and full restitution. Darcy, her treasurer, wasn't so lucky. She tried to deny involvement, but the digital trail buried her. She was sentenced to 4 years and ordered to repay every dollar. The court assigned an independent receiver to manage the HOA's finances during the transition. But the neighborhood wasn't waiting around for more bureaucracy. We held our own election, not for a president, but for a 5-member rotating council. No one could serve more than 1 year at a time. Every dollar spent had to be posted publicly within 24 hours. We went old-school physical bulletin board near the mailboxes, updated weekly. People started volunteering for things that used to be hired out: mowing the entrance lawn, repainting the community sign, fixing the broken light near the clubhouse. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. One afternoon, Hank invited me over again. This time, he handed me a framed photo and aerial shot of the neighborhood with my stretch of road dead center. "I had it printed," he said. "Thought you might want something to remember what you did." I stared at it. The clean pavement, the trimmed hedges, the quiet order of it all. "What we did," I corrected. He nodded once, then tapped the frame. "You know, you might have saved this whole place." I didn't say anything. Just stood there with the picture in my hands, the sounds of lawn sprinklers ticking in the distance. Later that month, I got a letter from the mayor, a formal thank you for civic leadership through extraordinary circumstances. They offered to name the road after me. I declined. Instead, I asked them to name it after the original developer, the guy who forgot to file the parcel paperwork. The man whose oversight gave me the leverage I needed when it mattered most. They agreed. So now, just outside my house, there's a small bronze sign mounted to the curb. Beaumont Way Private Road, no one questions it. No one tries anything anymore, and the truck, still parked right where it's always been, untouched, unbothered, exactly how it should be.